I, Eli Carter, ventured into the seemingly serene world of suburban living, seduced by the promise of a conveniently located house ripe for renovation. What I encountered instead was a meticulously manicured landscape of beige conformity, punctuated by the shrill pronouncements of the Homeowners Association and its self-appointed constable, Marcia. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a kingdom, and Marcia reigned supreme. Her scepter a clipboard, her crown a permanent scowl. The houses all looked the same, every homeowner following the rules set by the HOA. Everything was perfect, or that is what Marcia lived for. I thought I could coexist peacefully, remodeling my sanctuary while remaining politely indifferent to the HOA's petty edicts about lawn height and acceptable holiday decorations. I underestimated Marcia. She was the kind of person who derived pleasure from measuring the length of blades of grass and scrutinizing trash can placement. I tried my best to avoid her and her nosy behavior, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. My first encounter with Marcia happened shortly after moving in. She came to my door, clipboard in hand, inspecting my lawn, saying it needed to be cut, even though it was freshly cut. Her eyes were judging. I knew from that moment she would be trouble. The incident that ignited our conflict was, in retrospect, almost comically insignificant. My smart lock, a modern convenience I relied upon, had developed a disconcerting habit of unlocking itself in the dead of night. Concerned for my safety, that is why I invested in a robust replacement. A sleek and technologically advanced model finished in a matte black. The installation was swift, efficient, and seemingly innocuous. The new lock provided my family with a sense of safeness and security. It made me comfortable. Little did I know, this simple act of securing my home would unleash the full fury of Marcia's HOA indignation. Her world started to fall apart when that black lock appeared on the front door of my beautiful home. It ruined the beige conformity. 3 hours later, Marcia materialized on my doorstep, her face a mask of righteous disapproval. She launched into a tirade about my unauthorized modifications to the external appearance of my property, citing Section 8.3 of the Neighborhood Enhancement Covenant with an almost religious fervor. The problem? The lock was black, not the silver of its predecessor. It sounds ridiculous, but that small change in color sent Marcia into a full-blown bureaucratic frenzy. I tried to reason with her, explaining my security concerns and pointing out that the lock's color was hardly a neighborhood-altering event. She was not having it. To her, it was a blatant act of rebellion. Ignoring my pleas, she stormed back to her house muttering about actions have consequences. I rolled my eyes, foolishly believing that this was the end of the matter. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Consequences were indeed coming, and they were far more absurd and terrifying than I could have ever imagined, because next thing I knew, I was locked out of my own house. The following day unfolded with an unsettling blend of Kafkaesque absurdity and sheer disbelief. I returned from work, eager to unwind and enjoy the sanctuary of my home, only to find that my key refused to turn in the lock. The Smart app, once a reliable portal to my living space, displayed a chilling message. Access revoked. Panic began to set in, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. My first thought was some kind of hacking incident, but deep down, I knew the truth. This had Marcia's fingerprints all over it. I tried the back door, hoping for a different outcome, but it was the same, locked and sealed shut. What could I do? What did I do to deserve this? Then, I saw it. A note taped to the front door, stark white against the wood. Due to unauthorized modifications, this property is under HOA review. Access restricted until compliance is verified. HOA Enforcement Division. It was so ridiculous that I laughed, thinking it was some kind of elaborate prank. But when I glanced at my porch, my laughter died in my throat. 2 individuals sat in folding chairs, clad in neon vests that screamed, "Official business," guarding my house like it was Fort Knox. They were eating pretzels. Guarding my house. I demand they let me in my house. They said they were told I was a renter, attempting to illegally change the locks. All of this over a black lock. I demanded that these self-appointed sentinels relinquish their post and allow me access to my home. But they were unmoved. They informed me, with unsettling conviction, that they had been instructed to deny entry to anyone claiming to be a renter attempting to illegally change the locks. The HOA had twisted the reality, turning me into a trespasser on my own property. Frustration boiled over and I called the police, hoping that a voice of reason could cut through the bureaucratic madness, someone that these people would listen to. An officer arrived, seemingly bemused by the situation. But the security guards immediately began to bombard him with Marcia's version of the story, producing paperwork that, while undoubtedly bogus, lent their charade a veneer of legitimacy. And because of all this, I was locked out of my house. I presented the officer with my deed, my driver's license, and even footage from my doorbell camera, documenting the locksmith's installation and Marcia's initial complaint. Still, the officer was on the fence. He was confused by the information being presented to him. That's when the officer, visibly perplexed, decided to call for a supervisor. It was then that the situation began to escalate from the theater of the absurd to an all-out nuclear meltdown. The HOA had gone to a whole new level of crazy. The arrival of the police supervisor marked a turning point in the unfolding drama. He listened intently to both sides of the story, carefully reviewing the documents and evidence I had presented. It soon became clear that Marcia's actions went far beyond a simple case of HOA overreach. She hadn't just called security. She had orchestrated a full-blown assault on my property rights. The investigation revealed that Marcia had filed a fraudulent emergency maintenance request with the HOA, claiming that my house had been abandoned and compromised. She even went so far as to suggest that squatters had taken up residence, jeopardizing the safety and security of the neighborhood. She fraudulently signed off as interim property manager. Using her self-declared authority, she had triggered an obscure HOA clause that granted her temporary access to the property, until I showed up to ruin her plans with my deed and my camera footage. The HOA was in full-blown panic. Because Marcia did not just lie, she used HOA funds to hire a private lock company, change the locks again, and pay 2 off-duty contractors to block my home. Her ultimate goal? To seize control of my property. The supervisor, now thoroughly aware of the gravity of the situation, began to unravel Marcia's web of deceit. He questioned the legitimacy of the paperwork presented by the security guards and scrutinized the HOA's emergency maintenance request. It quickly became apparent that Marcia had abused her position of authority, manipulating the system to further her own agenda. The locksmith, caught in the middle of this escalating conflict, readily corroborated my story, confirming that he had been hired to install the new lock at my request. The walls were closing in on Marcia. She was becoming a liability to the rest of the HOA board members. As the truth began to emerge, a palpable sense of disbelief and outrage spread through the neighborhood. Residents who had once viewed Marcia as a champion of community standards now saw her as a manipulative and power-hungry schemer. They started to whisper and murmur amongst themselves. But that was not enough. They wanted to know what was happening. They were ready to join my side of the war. It turned out Marcia had been secretly trying to buy the property at a lowball price through a shell company, my home, while I was still living in it. She thought if she made enough of a scene, made enough of a non-compliance case, I'd be fined, flagged, and eventually pressured to sell. She was trying to force me out of my home and out of my life. But instead, her plan unraveled in front of 2 police officers, a confused locksmith who backed up my story, and half the neighborhood watching from across the street. With her carefully constructed facade crumbling around her, Marcia desperately attempted to salvage the situation. She tried to spin the narrative, claiming that she had acted in the best interests of the community, protecting it from unauthorized modifications and potential security threats. But her explanations rang hollow, failing to convince the officers or the increasingly skeptical crowd of onlookers. Her clipboard was confiscated. The guards left after realizing they'd been duped into blocking the actual owner. And as the HOA board arrived in a panic to do damage control, one of the members admitted Marcia had been running solo missions for months. Her carefully crafted image as a dedicated neighborhood ambassador was destroyed, replaced by the stark reality of her manipulative and self-serving behavior. The HOA members knew she was trouble. She was very controlling. That is why she got to be on the board. No one else wanted to deal with it. They had no idea how crazy she really was. The police officers, unmoved by her pleas, began to investigate the matter further. They interviewed the locksmith, who confirmed that I had hired him to install the lock, and they questioned the validity of the HOA's emergency maintenance request. It soon became clear that Marcia had acted without proper authorization, circumventing the established procedures and abusing her position of authority. The security guards, realizing they had been duped into participating in a fraudulent scheme, quietly removed their neon vests and retreated, leaving Marcia to face the consequences of her actions. No one wanted to be involved with her anymore. The HOA board members arrived, their faces etched with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. They attempted to distance themselves from Marcia's actions. One board member admitted that Marcia had been operating independently for months, pursuing her own agenda without consulting the other members. He also admitted that they turned the other way and let her continue her crazy behavior. They wanted it to stop. This incident was the last straw. The evidence against Marcia continued to mount. A neighbor, sweet old Mr. Langston from 2 doors down, walks over and hands the officer a flash drive. Says his security cam caught Marcia sneaking around my house the night before the incident, whispering into her phone, directing someone on how to disable my doorbell camera. She wasn't just bold. She was prepping a hostile takeover. She hoped to force me out of my house. She was determined to ruin my life. Mr. Langston's contribution proved to be the final nail in Marcia's coffin. The video footage clearly showed her skulking around my property the night before the lockout, whispering instructions into her phone and directing someone on how to disable my doorbell camera. It was irrefutable evidence of her premeditated actions, shattering any lingering doubts about her guilt. She was trying to hide evidence from the police. She wanted the police to believe her story. She was doing everything she could to take down my family and acquire my home. The video footage revealed a calculated and malicious plot, exposing Marcia's intent to sabotage my property and manipulate the situation to her advantage. It was clear that she had not simply acted out of a misguided sense of community duty. She had actively planned and executed a hostile takeover, driven by greed and a thirst for control. The revelation of Marcia's treachery sent shockwaves through the crowd. Residents who had once admired her now saw her in a completely different light, recognizing the depth of her deceit and the extent of her manipulation. They felt betrayed and violated, their sense of community shattered by her selfish actions. They were furious and wanted to see justice served. The police officers, armed with this new evidence, informed Marcia that she was under investigation for fraud, trespassing, and a host of other charges. While they did not arrest her on the spot, they made it clear that the consequences of her actions would be severe. She was going to be held accountable for the damage she caused. The HOA board members, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, immediately convened an emergency meeting to discuss Marcia's future role in the community. They knew that her actions had tarnished the reputation of the HOA and jeopardized the trust of the residents. They were determined to take swift and decisive action to restore order and rebuild the community's confidence. No one wanted to be associated with Marcia or her terrible behavior. The following night, the HOA board meeting was a spectacle to behold. The room was packed with residents, all eager to witness Marcia's downfall. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mixture of anticipation, anger, and morbid curiosity. Someone even brought popcorn, adding a touch of dark humor to the proceedings. Everyone wanted to watch the show. Everyone wanted to witness the end of Marcia. The vote to remove Marcia from the HOA board was swift and unanimous. In just 11 minutes flat, her reign of terror came to an end. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering the decision and celebrating the triumph of justice over tyranny. The HOA members breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing that they had finally rid themselves of a toxic influence. They could now begin the process of rebuilding the community and restoring trust among the residents. Peace would be restored to the neighborhood again, for real this time. In the aftermath of the Marcia debacle, a sense of catharsis washed over the neighborhood. The air seemed lighter, the lawns greener, and the beige houses appeared a little less monotonous. Residents who had once been intimidated by Marcia's overbearing presence began to assert their own individuality, planting colorful flowers, hanging whimsical decorations, and even daring to paint their front doors in shades other than beige. The community was starting to rebuild. They were starting to bond together over their shared experiences. They had all been victims of Marcia's terrible behavior. The police investigation into Marcia's actions continued, and she eventually faced charges related to fraud, trespassing, and abuse of power. While the legal proceedings dragged on, the community remained united in its determination to hold her accountable for her actions. No one was going to let her get away with what she did. She was going to be punished for her actions. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about the perils of suburban living and the importance of standing up to injustice, no matter how small. I also discovered that beneath the veneer of conformity and passive aggression, my neighbors were a resilient and compassionate bunch, willing to rally together in the face of adversity. I was so relieved to see everyone come together. I was not alone, but even in the midst of this chaos, there was a silver lining. The incident brought the community together, fostering a new sense of camaraderie and solidarity. Residents began to organize neighborhood events, share stories, and support one another in ways they never had before. They turned to their neighbors and friends for support. They learned to trust one another because they had all experienced the same trauma. Oh, and I kept the black lock, a proud symbol of resistance against beige tyranny. It served as a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can spark the greatest change. All of this because a black lock was placed on the door of my beautiful house. Marcia's actions served as a cautionary tale, reminding everyone of the importance of vigilance and the dangers of unchecked power. And she had to serve the consequences of her actions. As the dust settled, I found myself feeling a sense of gratitude for my neighbors, for the police officers who had uncovered the truth, and even for Marcia herself, for it was her bizarre and misguided actions that had ultimately brought our community together, transforming us from a collection of beige houses into a vibrant and supportive neighborhood. In the end, the black lock became more than just a symbol of security. It became a symbol of unity, resilience, and the triumph of community over conformity. But on top of it all, I learned to never underestimate a Karen.